In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make these cute sweater gift tags. We're going to be using brushes from my Sweater Knit for Procreate set to fill in the sweater and also to do the sweater knit lettering. If you want to check out the full set, that is linked in the video description below. You can also download a free sample brush from this set to follow along with most of the tutorial when you sign up for my newsletter. The link for that is up here in the cards. I also have a few free brushes we're going to use at the end and the color palette, which you can download in the description directly. No sign up necessary. All right, let's get started. I'm going to create a new canvas. I'm going to use the 3000 by 3000 pixel square setting that I have, and immediately I'm going to tap the wrench to go into the settings, and under canvas, I'm going to tap drawing guide and edit drawing guide, and we're going to set this to symmetry. And when you tap symmetry, it has the symmetry line right down the center of the canvas. That's perfect. We're going to keep this as is and then hit done. And now when I open the layers panel, the first layer says assisted down here on the bottom. If I add layers, these are not assisted. So unassisted layers will not have the symmetry activated and assisted layers will. To turn assisted on and off, you can tap to bring up the side menu and then tap drawing assist. We're going to just use symmetry for the first step to draw our initial sweater shape, and then we'll draw in our final line work on an unassisted layer above that. For both the sketch and the line work, I'm going to be using the Studio Pen, which is from the inking panel that comes with Procreate. And I have the size set to about 17 here. Starting from the symmetry line, we're going to begin by drawing in the curve of the front neckline. Try to make sure that when the lines meet at the center of the curve, it's straight. You want to avoid creating a V unless you're intentionally drawing a V-neck. So it should be straight where it meets and then start curving upward. Then we're going to draw a shallow curve for the back neckline, connecting from the front neckline to the center. Same thing here, you'll want the lines to meet neatly in the center, so there should be a 90-degree angle between the symmetry line and the center of that curve. Next, to draw the rest of the neck trim, extend a line out from the edge of the neckline at a slight angle, and then follow the curve of the front neckline, trying to keep the width or the distance approximately the same along the curve. My lines here are a bit sketchy, so I'm going to grab the eraser tool to neaten this up a bit. And then I'm going to draw in another shallow curve to create the back neck trim. All right, so now we have our neckline. We can add our shoulders. I'm going to extend this at a slope. And then the armhole curve, we're going to connect from the edge of the shoulder. It's going to be straight partway down before it starts to curve outwards slightly. This might be a little too intense of a curve, but I'll adjust it later. And then we will draw the sides of the sweaters, extending down at a slight angle before curving it in at the bottom, and then extending a straight line down at the bottom hem for the rib trim. And then we'll connect this with a line that curves ever so slightly to meet in the middle. To draw the sleeves, start from where the shoulder and the armhole meet, and then draw a sloping curve downward, straightening a bit through the length of the sleeve, and then tapering in towards the bottom and curving it inward where the rib trim of the cuff starts. Now I can already tell that my proportions are quite off. The sweater seems a little too wide through the upper body and upper sleeves and has too much slope through the shoulders, but we'll fix that in a moment. I'm grabbing the eraser to clean up my lines a bit before finishing drawing the sleeves. I'm just drawing my cuffs in here, so the sleeves are laid flat behind the body a bit. And now to start fixing the sweater proportions, I'm going to redraw my armhole curve so that it doesn't draw in towards the center front quite as much. And then I'm also going to make these shoulders a little less sloped, and then I'm going to connect that to the sleeve. Then using the eraser tool to clean up my old lines and see what I think here. I now think that the armhole curve is actually a little too curved, so I'm going to straighten that out. And then I'm also going to drop that armhole point a little further down, and then use the eraser once more to clean that up as well. The proportions are definitely better, but it's still looking a little broad through the shoulders. So to fix that, I'm going to use the Liquify tool, tapping the wand to open the adjustments menu, select Liquify, and then on the bottom bar, set the tool to push. Liquify works with symmetry, so it's great to use in situations like this to easily make adjustments to both sides. I'm using this to kind of nudge the proportions to where I want them to be, so narrowing the shoulders, smoothing out this excessive bump in the sleeves, and just making the whole sweater a little more squarish. You'll see me adjust the size of the tool depending on what I'm moving, so smaller for more precise bits, and then larger to move just bigger areas of the sweater. Drop the neckline down a little bit and make it just a bit wider. And then just finesse the curves here. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to exit the Liquify tool, and now we are done with Symmetry. So we can use Transform to move this around. I had almost run out of space on the bottom, so I'm going to move this up to center it. And then opening my Layers panel, we can reduce the opacity of this layer so that we can then draw in our cleaned up line work. So tap the N and then drag the opacity slider down to about 30%. Then working on the empty layer above, making sure that this one doesn't have symmetry turned on, so it doesn't say assisted underneath, we can draw in our line work. Still using the Studio Pen, I'm going to be making some small changes as I redraw this. Mainly, I am going to make my neckline trim a little wider. And then I'm also varying my pencil pressure as I draw, which creates this thick and thin look in the line work. Although I'm making it a little too thick here, so I'm going to grab the eraser to slim that line back down before going over it once more with the brush. Then tracing over my back neck trim here, making that a little wider as well. Now, as I continue to trace this, I am trying to position my canvas for each brush stroke intentionally to then draw those brush strokes in one smooth, fluid motion as much as I possibly can. There's going to be some areas like down here at the cuff where that gets a little more tricky to get it just right, but as much as possible, I'm trying to keep things fluid and smooth here. And now this layer is just going to be the basic outline without the detail. We're going to separate out the detail onto a new layer. So now with my line work done, I'm going to open up my layers panel and hide my original sketch layer. And now we're going to add a new layer. And this is where we're going to draw in our details like the rib trim. So I'm going to decrease my brush size to draw in the rib trim. And starting on the neckline, I'm just going to space these lines mostly evenly apart, but it definitely does not have to be perfect. And then we're going to follow the curve of the band on the front neckline. So as I go around the curve, some of these lines are going to be somewhat angled. I'm still trying to keep the spacing relatively consistent. And then moving down to the bottom of my sweater, I'm adding in evenly spaced lines along the cuffs, trying to draw them all approximately the same length. And then I'm doing the same on the bottom rib trim as well. And then I like to add these little like fold or wrinkle lines at each armhole. And then while we're here at the armhole, let's add some visible stitch decreases here, spacing them out equally until they go up about 2/3 of the way up the armhole. And then I like to try to make sure that the spacing is equal and level on the other side. So now we have our details separated, and moving back down to our main outline layer, I'm going to tap to bring up the side menu, and then I'm going to select reference. And this will allow us to use automatic selection on other layers, and it will reference this line or this layer for the line work. Now, in between these two layers, let me actually just rename these to make that easier. So in between my line work and details layer, I'm going to add 3 new layers. Let me rename them quick. And I'm going to duplicate my sweater sleeve layer so that I have 1 layer for each sleeve. So I have 4 new layers in between. And then on our sweater body, we can fill this with a sweater knit texture. For colors, I'm going to be using colors from my Wintery watercolor palette, which is available to download in the description below. So I'm selecting this bright red. And then for my brush, you can use the free sweater knit texture brush that I have available for download, but I'm going to be using the variegated stockinette watercolor version. Now, this brush has a couple saved size points that will align perfectly with the saved size points of the brush that we'll use to draw in the lettering, and so that's why I'm using this one. So selecting the smaller size point, we can start filling in the body. With these brushes, the size slider controls not just the brush tip size, but also the pattern scale. And so it will take a little longer to fill in this body because that brush tip is also smaller because we're choosing this smaller pattern scale. You'll see I'm going outside the lines. That's totally okay. We will clean that up in the next step. Because we have our line work set as a reference layer, I'm going to use the selection tool, set to automatic, making sure that color fill is turned off so it's gray. And then I'm going to just tap outside the sweater. I'm going to select both the sleeves, and then I'm also going to tap to select the line work. Then I'm going to use 3 fingers to scrub the screen back and forth, and that will clear the selected areas. So now with our body filled, we can move on to the sleeves. In my layers panel, I'm selecting one of the empty sleeve layers. We're going to do these one at a time. So moving to the left side, I'm going to start filling this sleeve with the pattern. This time I'm going well outside the lines so that there's a lot of margin on all sides of the sleeve. Then I'm going to tap the transform tool and set this to warp. And we're going to use this to make the pattern follow the curve of the sleeve. So dragging the blue nodes, I'm pulling each corner in toward the center of the sweater and then dragging on the mesh itself to adjust the curve. I'm trying to limit the distortion of the pattern by keeping the curve gradual and consistent. So try to avoid squishing it or stretching it too much. Once you're happy with the amount of curve, tap the transform tool once more to exit. And then we will clean up everything outside the lines in a moment, but first we're going to go in the layers panel and move to the second sweater sleeve layer. And doing the same here, we're going to fill in a larger rectangle of pattern around the sleeve, and then tap the transform tool, set to warp, and curve this around. So I'm just dragging the nodes and the pattern itself to kind of curve this around the shape of the sleeve, and then you can also pull in on the sides as well. All right, now we can go back into our layers panel, and I'm going to pinch to merge both of these layers. And now we can select to remove all of the overlap and everything outside of the lines. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, set to automatic, tap outside the sweater. This time I'm going to tap the body of the sweater, and then we'll tap the line work again. And then I'm going to use the 3-finger scrub motion to clear the layer. And now we just have our sleeves here. So if you are following along just with the free sample brush and you don't have the lettering brushes from the set, at this point you could use the studio pen to just write in your gift tag details. Now, if you are using the full brush set, I'll show you how to create the stitch lettering using these stitch detail brushes. So at the bottom of the set, I'm selecting the single whale brush. Stitch detail, I'm going to select the single whale brush. I'm working on the lettering layer here. We're going to set the blend mode to multiply so we can see it a little better. And then I'm going to use this darkest green color. Zooming in so you can see better, this brush will draw a single whale of stitches. Whales are the vertical columns of stitches and courses are the horizontal rows. So this brush, set to the smaller size point, will draw a single whale that then matches the size of the sweater pattern below. We're going to use the quick shape feature of Procreate where it snaps into a straight line to keep everything neat and tidy. So zooming out a bit to see more of the sweater, I'm trying to gauge what size the letters should be here as we're writing the words to and from in stitches and leaving space for names to be handwritten. So let's start by drawing a vertical line for the letter T to test it out. And without lifting my pencil, you can see the line snaps into a straight line. This is the quick shape function. Now, zooming in on the line, I'm going to tap this line button that appears at the top. And now I can reposition the line so that it matches the pattern below. You can adjust the angle and also stretch the stitches by dragging the blue nodes. And you can reposition the line by dragging on the line itself or just outside of it. Once the stitches are aligned, tap the screen once to exit quick shape. Next, we're going to draw a second line. I find that the easiest way to make it the exact same length is by initially drawing directly on top of the first line until it looks like it's the right number of stitches, and then hold my pencil to the screen to let it snap into a quick shape. Then tapping the line button at the top here, I can drag it over to sit right next to the first line of stitches. Now to draw the top horizontal line of the T, we're going to switch to the single stitch stamp brush. This works as a stamp, but also to draw a horizontal line of stitches. So I'm drawing a line, this time horizontal and with just 2 stitches, and then keeping my pencil on the screen until it snaps into a quick shape. Then I'm going to tap line to edit, and I can reposition and adjust the spacing of the stitches. Then I will repeat this for a second line, 2 stitches long, and position this one directly below the first. Now I'm doing the same on the other side with 2 more lines. After looking at it, I think I want to make this horizontal line a little thicker, so I'm going to add 1 more. Now, to draw the O, I'm switching back to the single whale brush. And here we have to decide how far away the letter will be, as well as how tall the lowercase letter is. I'm leaving a space of 2 courses in between the letters, and then I'm going to start my first line partway down my T and end it so that it's 1 stitch above the bottom stitch of the T, which is our baseline for the letters. I'm going to reposition this a little, and then drawing directly on top of the first line, I'll make the second line the exact same length, and reposition this so it sits directly next to the first line. Now, to draw the top of the O, I'm drawing a line that is just 2 stitches long, and I'm positioning this so that it sits 1 stitch higher than the first 2 lines that we drew for this. To draw the bottom of the O, I'm drawing 2 more stitches, and I'm positioning this to be 1 stitch lower than the lines that make up the side. And then to draw the other side of my O, I'm going to, again, draw directly over my first one, and it looks like I maybe drew 1 more stitch than I needed. So I'm still going to position this to make sure that the line is stretched out the same amount, and then I'm going to move it over, and I'll just go in with the eraser and carefully erase that 1 stitch. You can see I'm so zoomed in that it's a little pixelated. That's okay. Then we're going to go back to the brush and draw in our second line for the O. Then tap to edit and reposition this so that it sits directly next to the first line. Okay, now we have our 2. Let's add a colon. Using the single stitch stamp, I'm going to have 1 whale in between, and then position these with a couple stitches in between. And now we can move on to the word from. I want my F to be the same height as my T, and so we're actually just going to cheat a little bit, and rather than drawing our F totally from scratch, I'm going to use the selection tool set to freehand select this time. And we're going to draw a selection entirely around the T, and then down here on the bottom bar, I'm going to tap copy and paste. And now this will have pasted a new layer from that selection, so we can just grab the transform tool and move this down. And if I zoom out to see exactly where I want to position this, so we're going to erase these stitches here on this side, and then I want this to be the edge of my F aligned with the edge of the T here. So I'm moving it down a little bit and then over just a smidge further. And then I'm zooming in to make sure that it is aligned with the stitches of the pattern beneath. And then I'll release the selection, and using the eraser tool set pretty small, we're just going to zoom in and erase this side of the T. And now we can use this for our F. So going back to the brush, I'm still using the single whale brush, and we're going to extend the top of the F a little further. So I'm going to add a line of just 3 stitches here, holding until it's a quick shape, and then tapping line up here to adjust the placement. And then for the lower line on the F, I'm going to add a line of just 2 stitches, tap to edit and adjust the placement, and then add 2 more stitches directly next to those first 2. So now we have our F, we can draw our R. Now I want the R to be the same height as the tallest points of my O. And so to do that, I'm going to draw a line directly on top, starting at the highest point of my O and then going down to the lowest point, and then tapping line to edit. And then dragging the blue nodes to stretch and squish the stitches so that it's the exact same length and generally aligns with the pattern. Now I've zoomed out, and still keeping it in this editing mode, I'm going to tap outside of the line and drag it down to position this next to my F, figuring out how far apart from my F that I want, and then making sure that it is aligned on the bottom. Next, we're going to add another line of stitching directly next to this. So I'm drawing a line exactly on top until it's the same length and number of stitches, and then tapping line to edit the spacing of the stitches and move it right next to the first line. Now to draw the curved top part of the R, I'm going to draw 2 stitches and hold till it snaps to a quick shape, and then tap to edit this and position it so it's staggered 1 stitch down from the first 2 lines. And then I'm going to repeat this once more right next to it. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my lettering layer and steal the O so that we don't have to recreate that from scratch. So I'm going to grab the selection tool again, set to freehand, draw a selection around the O, and then on the bottom bar, tap copy and paste. And this will be on its own layer now. So I'm going to grab the transform tool And positioning our O, I'm going to eyeball this. I want about a space in between the R and the O, and then I want to make sure that the bottom of the O is aligned with the bottom of the other letters. Then I'm going to zoom in so that I can see a little better to make sure that it is aligned with the pattern stitches below. Now to start the M, I want this to be the same height as the O, and so I'm going to draw directly on top to get the same number of stitches, but I actually think as I'm stretching the line here that I drew one stitch too many. That's okay, we'll just go in again and erase that top stitch. While I'm still in the edit mode, I'm going to drag this over next to the O, and I'm going to leave some space in between the O and the M and make sure that this is aligned to the pattern below, and then also on the bottom aligned to the other letters. And then I'm grabbing the eraser tool to erase just that one top stitch. And then switching back to the brush, we're going to draw a line directly on top of this first one, tap to edit, and squish the stitches to make sure that it's the same length, and then move it right next to the first line. Now to continue drawing our M, I'm going to zoom in a little more and draw 2 stitches in a line next to the first 2 lines, and then position this so it is staggered 1 stitch down from the top. And then moving over, we're going to draw 3 stitches this time, tap to edit, and then position this staggered 1 stitch down further. And now that's the center of the M, so we're going to mirror the other side, drawing 2 stitches down, and then positioning this so that it matches the other 2 on the other side of the M. And then we're going to draw the 2 long lines to finish out the M. So to make them the same length, I'm going to draw directly on top of the first lines to get the same number of stitches. Hold till it snaps into a quick shape, and then stretch my stitches to make sure that it matches. And then we're going to drag this right over to the other side of the M and position it so that it aligns with the pattern of stitches below. And then release and draw directly on top of that to draw the other line of stitches for the M. We're going to move this directly next to the other line. And now we just need to add a colon next to it. So opening my brush panel, I'm going to switch to the single stitch stamp brush, and then we're going to leave a space in between the M and the colon, and then tap to draw 2 stitches with a couple stitches in between. Then in our layers panel, I'm going to pinch to merge all 3 of these, and by merging them into the lower lettering layer, they're all now set to multiply. Now this step is optional. If you want to use a string with your tag, we're going to draw a circle. So moving to the details layer and selecting black, I'm going to use the studio pen to draw this. And we're going to draw a circle and hold the pencil to the screen until it snaps into a quick shape. And then touch a finger to the screen and it'll snap into a perfect circle. So if you keep your finger to the screen and then slide your pencil back and forth, you can adjust the size. And then you can tap to edit the same way we did the lines and adjust the placement. And then you have a spot where you can hole punch to tie it with a string to the gift. All right, bonus step number 2 is you can add watercolor shading to this. So above my 2 knitting layers, I'm going to add a new layer set to multiply. And then I'm going to use some of the watercolor brushes that come with the set. You could also use any other watercolor brushes or even an airbrush set to a lower opacity. I'm going to use the soft build watercolor brush, and then using the same red that we drew the sweater knit texture with. And I'm going to do some quick layer organization. And now I am just going to paint this in a few places. So where the sleeves are kind of tucked under the body, I'm going to add a bit of a shadow there and a little bit along the side seam of the sweater as well. This brush is a layering brush, so it gets darker the more brush strokes that you layer on top of one another. So I'm using that to create darker shadows in some places. Then I'm also adding some shading along the outside of the sleeves, kind of to help give it some form, and then also along the bottom hem and at the sleeves rib trim. And then also painting in along the back of the sweater, the back neckline and trim. To clean up anything that was painted outside of the lines, you can use the selection tool set to automatic and then tap outside of the sweater body to select that empty space and use a 3-finger scrub motion to clear the selection. The third bonus step is super extra but also cute. I've made a couple free brushes that are available in the description below to download, and we can create a dashed cut line and scissors. So first I'm going to switch to black. And then in the layers panel, we're going to draw this on its own layer. So add a new layer above everything and then open the brushes panel and snag a dashed line brush. And then we're going to use this to draw an outline around the sweater, spaced a little ways apart from the sweater body. making sure to leave a gap at the beginning and the end. Then switching to the scissor brush, we're going to draw the scissors on its own layer. So in the layers panel, add a new layer, tap once to stamp in the scissors, and then grab the transform tool to reposition this, rotate it, and resize it so that it fits in the space we left in the dashed line. Then I'm going to grab both of these layers together and use the transform tool to reposition this because it wasn't super centered or spaced evenly apart from the sweater. And then I'm going to use freehand select to remove the top of my dashed line and just redraw this in because it was pretty wonky. Okay, now we're really done. That's the end of the bonus extra steps. Be sure to check out the full brush set following the link in the description below and snag all the freebies while you're at it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.